Pests beware, your fields have heroes. The Pests and Predators podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and is powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. Visit fieldheroes.ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday, midweek edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, of course, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We do appreciate it. Today on the program, we got a good one. We got Brian Comeault is going to be here to talk about the markets, what's going on from that regard. As we got a lot of the seed in the ground now, we move on to the production season, everyone's favorite time of the year, but we can't take our eye off the ball when it comes to following what's going on with those markets. Maybe you're still dealing with some of the 24 crop, of course, definitely the 25 crops in front of us, and some of you may be thinking out even further than that. We've got John Barlow, who is, again, the Shadow Minister of Agriculture for the Conservative Party of Canada, will be with us. John's third time, I believe, in that role. Of course, probably would have been the Ag Minister had Pierre Poilievre won the election. Well, he didn't. So Mr. Barlow is back in the seat of Shadow Minister of Agriculture, knows the file well. We'll hear what some of his priorities are as Minister McDonald still very much getting his feet wet from an industry perspective and digging in on what some of these big issues are for the industry. Maybe he can be pushed by the Shadow Minister, Barlow. We'll see what John has to say. And we've got the Farm Safety Roundup as well today. Chad Roberts of WSPS will be with us. We're going to talk today about, for all you livestock farmers out there, large animal handling. And what are some of the safety things and measures that we can take to ensure that we stay safe? If you've grown up around large animals, you know that there can be some pretty tight situations you can get yourself in. And in many cases, those are avoidable. So we'll talk about that today with Chad Roberts. Now, if you have any feedback on today's program, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Of course, you can find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call that Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Want to mention, you hear us talking about our Real Agriculture newsletters from time to time. We've got one we just kind of really fired up, and that's the Mind Your Farm Business email. Now, you know well, if you're a longtime follower of Real Agriculture, you know we do the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, which has been sponsored since day one by RBC Royal Bank. Well, the podcast has been so popular and so many listeners, we decided to kind of build out that a little bit more on the Real Agriculture website. So if you go to mindyourfarmbusiness.com, you'll see a collection of all of our stories and interviews related to farm management. So whether that's succession planning, tax planning, strategic planning, we got all of our Real Agri Studies data is on that page. The Truth About Ag podcast with Evan and Christian is on that page. Anything to do with just managing our farms. And you can sign up for a newsletter. We're sending it out every 2 weeks. And you can do that by going to realagriculture.com/subscribe. Good stuff in there for Canadian and American listeners of Real Ag Radio. So check that out. That's realagriculture.com/subscribe. And you can also go to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we got Brian Comeault standing by. We're talking markets right after this. Time for a product spotlight with ATP Nutrition. Founder and CEO, Jared Chambers.
The one thing that foliar should not be looked upon as is a way to fix a big problem that you're having. It needs to be built into your overall nutrient management plan. A lot of times the soil can't supply what the plant needs. This is where you have to put on a supplemental application to complement what you're already putting on in the soil. Sometimes we put on less nutrition we want for a wide variety of reasons, and foliars is a good way to top it up.
Same concept is like like starter fertilizer.
What we're trying to do with a foliar, we call it a second opportunity of starter fertilizer. We want to give enough nutrition to the plant for 7 to 10 days. So let's put on the right amount, the right products, and the right ratios to feed that plant at that vegetative stage for 7 to 10 days. In-season nutrition on a regular basis to complement what they're doing in the soil. If you don't have a tissue test or soil test, then that's where we recommend a complete multi-nutrient product, like a relief product, to kind of get it right 80% of the time, because we know that's what the plant needs at that stage.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch WheatPete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Hey, from nutrient management to the latest weather, market, and ag trends, the Dirt and Economics podcast is your place for farm smart topics to boost your profitability. Join Mike Howell on Season 4 of the Dirt podcast, available now at nutrient-economicswithak.com. Let's talk markets here on this Wednesday as everyone's cruising through the field on a planter seeder or possibly even a sprayer. Joining us right now is Brian Comeault. He is one of the partners with Ireland, Comeault, and Lafoy. How are we doing today, Brian?
Good, Sean. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Okay, so let's talk about some of the fundamentals. What I guess as we sit here at the back end of May, what do we know fundamentally about this market?
We know, canola is relatively tight, and I mean, we could debate the Statistics Canada numbers. I'm sure there are some that are, whether it's production or the on-farm storage, things like that. But you could just feel it in the marketplace. You can see it in the futures market as it, we made some new highs on the November just yesterday. We pushed back towards old highs on the July contract yesterday as well. Both of those are coming off a little bit today, but we're still, high in the box as far as pricing goes. And the charts, kind of tell a story there about where we are fundamentally on canola. Statistics Canada reported that there was about 4.6 million tons of canola in farm bins at the end of March. And astoundingly, farmers delivered 1.92 million tons of that in the month of April, at least according to Statistics Canada. Add another, almost 750,000 tons in the last 3 weeks that the CGC has reported. That leaves us with only 1.9, million tons in farm bins if you're using those numbers as
That's
metrics,
tight.
which that is tight, especially, at the end of May. May is generally a slow delivery month because of seeding and all of that kind of thing. But June and July can pick up quite substantially. We have been seeing, some crush plants and such, issuing premiums and things like that. I find that it particularly comes into play when, maybe when the market is off a little bit, farmers aren't participating in selling, or if the market is pushing higher and they want to kind of give that little extra boost to get to those, target prices, things like that. So, the fact that there's still premiums floating around at this time of year, I think is also a signal that supplies are tighter. It's hard to get farmers to open the bin doors and sell canola, likely because there isn't a whole lot of it left.
Yeah, well, and you look at that November 25 chart on canola, man, it's especially the yearly chart. Like it's just I don't call it a rocket ship, but farmers probably want to see it go a little bit higher. But we've been on a run here, and so there's the fundamentals which are telling us one thing, but then you look at the from a chart technical perspective, you're like, ooh, is it a little too steamy? Is this the is this the time where you that inventory should be even tighter hands, and we got a long ways to go up from here, or is this a risk management approach where okay, it's been a pretty good run, I better not get greedy here?
I mean, we did advocate for adding some coverage and taking some risk off the table when we got to those previous highs. That wasn't because we were, necessarily turning negative or turning bearish, but that is a good discipline play, right? You add to your coverage levels, whether that's old crop or new crop, and then you make a plan B, whether that's using, option products or derivative products with a broker or something like that. Those are things we advocate for. Floor pricing strategies, things like that are really good decisions at, when markets are pushing towards previous highs. This market from a charting perspective, there's some things that are underpinning it, right? We've got good crush margins, or at least relatively speaking, in the new crop position. And and we have more crush capacity coming online in fall. So, there's going to be more competition for some of these, for canola specifically. We get kind of this yo-yo action on the 45Z, or the U.S. Biofuels policy, which kind of can ebb and flow the market to some degree. But the last piece of news was relatively positive, and canola's back in the fold on 45Z. So that, the U.S. being Canada's number one customer for canola oil is helpful to that market. The U.S. is a very important partner for us for canola oil and canola meal. There hasn't been any signs of slowing down, the exports of those products to the U.S., even with all of the recent tariff, talk and chatter and stuff like that.
Well, yeah. Like, speaking of the tariffs, how do you reconcile the movement we've had with those tariffs? Are those tariffs having any impact, or like reconcile this for us a little bit? Because I think what's happened is a little bit backwards to what people thought, because the tariffs got placed on that Friday. Market shoots lower. Everyone's talking about compensation and, look at the market loss because of EVs. And then as of about a week after the announcement, we've just kind of gone higher since then. So what's actually happening here behind the scenes from a buying perspective from China?
Well, what happened was that tariffs never actually took effect on canola products into the U.S. So, yes, China put tariffs on canola oil and canola meal, but they left them off canola seed. And, but, even before that, China had not been a big buyer of our canola oil and canola meal. But we continue to ship them canola seed without a tariff. The U.S., never did place a tariff on our canola oil and canola, meal, primarily because those are products that are included in the free trade agreement, or the USMCA, or whatever acronym it's called on either side of the border. But so, I think the industry just was kind of looking at it going, business as usual. Let's get the business done. And I don't know if you want to call it front loading or just, regular course of business, but the demand for the oil, the meal, into the U.S. and the seed into China is still there, and none of those were affected by tariffs. So we kind of, it kind of dodged a bullet.
So there's been lots of rumors circulating about, that when those tariffs went on meal and on oil, that, seed was going to happen at some point. This was, so that's the next step. Is that when you're talking to people on the ground in China and traders in the industry, do people still think that?
I think the risk has come off significantly of that. And it's likely because China has larger problems on the trade front than Canada EVs, right? And so, maybe a prioritization on their part in trade agreements with, the US or with other parts of the world are occurring. And so the issues, facing Canada and China's trade relationships have been put significantly on the back burner.
When we've got canola at 700, are there substitutes? Like at what point is it like, canola too expensive?
Yeah, there absolutely is substitutes. Soybean oil is a substitute. Obviously, palm oil is a substitute, at least for the biofuel sector. For the food sector, it gets a little bit more interesting because there are traits of canola oil that are unique, and deals have been inked based on the health benefits of canola oil, things like that. So yeah, there is some ebb and flow, but we have seen strong soybean oil pricing as well. And and for a while there, it did look like that soybean oil was the propellant for canola to move higher. What we've seen recently, though, is a little bit of a divergence. So canola is pushing higher, even though soybean oil is kind of remaining stagnant. So in that regard, yes, there's a potential that we are kind of bumping up against some resistance here, or it's harder for canola to rally without the help of soybean oil, but obviously it's not impossible for it to do so.
And the whole biofuel industry waiting for, what are those RVOs going to be? And there's a lot of speculation out there. Well, we all just watch with wait with a lot of anticipation. When we have, from a biofuel front, though, if we have oil trending lower and soybean oil and canola oil headed higher, is there a point here where we hear some squeaking and squawking about that?
Yeah, I think, once we get ethanol prices and other biofuel prices, in the area where they are getting cheaper and it's too expensive to substitute in, like price is the determining factor of everything, whether or not it is, environmentally friendly or not. At some point, price becomes the largest, point of discussion. I mean, today crude oil's up, pretty big. It's kind of been trading sideways, for the last couple of weeks. So it's kind of been a non-issue, particularly, for the canola market. I think the canola market currently is pricing in Canadian fundamentals, most heavily. I think if the other products start to back off or start to become less of an issue, or less of a propellant for canola, I think what will happen is you'll see a switch to basis having to do that. So, okay. The buyers have been, relatively soft on basis recently. I think if you look at the Alberta Wheat Commission, they report basis is something like -18. What we are seeing in real time is probably, 0 or option to, +5, maybe a little bit higher than that in some areas in the West. But by the end of this crop year, if futures are going to stop doing the work, I think we're going to start seeing basis step up and do some of that work as well.
Well, and speaking of Canadian fundamentals, we'll get the final call here on what the acre number is, but the dry bias that, so we talk about the production and where that all shakes up with, that story's still yet to be written, I guess. We're going to know a lot more when we get to into July.
Yeah, I think I do think there were some acres that shifted out of canola, but they may have, somewhat shifted back in.
Yeah.
I was talking to a flax trader the other day, and some small acres in Manitoba, for example, went from canola to flax. But I do think the early planting season that we've had this year does favor planting of the majors. So, what I call the expensive crops, the canolas, the wheat, things like that. Where you tend to get shifts is in late seeding years when when you get shifts to barley or shifts to oats or things like that. So I think, it's kind of maybe a bit of a balance. The early seeding favors higher canola acres. Maybe some of the trade disputes earlier on in the year, favored a reduction of acres. So maybe we're kind of at the even mark. I'm not sure.
I'm tempted. Now, this is incredibly unscientific, but I am very tempted to take the over on what our expectation is on the canola number, because one of the things I'm hearing from the field is a little bit different this year. Is usually Christmas is like, you talk to some of the seed companies, it's like, we're hoping for some in-season sales, but typically what your sales are December 31st is kind of where the number sort of shakes out. Hearing a lot of in-season sales this year from some of the canola seed companies. Again, anecdotal, not scientific. So we'll see how it all comes. Hey, Brian, do you have time to hang around for another segment and talk wheat?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Hey, your Eastern Canadian Vaterstad dealer has product available now. This includes the industry-leading Carrier XL disc cultivator and the Tempo F high-speed planter, designed to provide outstanding emergence. Find your local dealer by visiting vaterstad.com. RealAgriculture.com. We're talking to Brian Comeault from Ireland, Comeault, Lafoy. We're going to talk wheat when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazix Seeds and Lalamon Plant Care.
Time for a product spotlight with Genesis Fertilizer. Joined right now by one of the board of directors, Garth White.
I think Canada should be the powerhouse in agriculture. We should be number one in the world. We need infrastructure. We have a very strong fertilizer industry, but demand for fertilizer is growing 2 to 4% per year. So there's going to be need for more supply. It's important for the prairies generally and be self-sufficient and have a closed loop. It's farmer sustained, and also is that it's going to be sustainable. This plant will be the most modern, the most environmentally sustainable plant in the world. And I know when farmers start selling their product, the big guys like agri-food people are looking for sustainable product. You need to have some sort of stability in your own economy. And I think Genesis will play that role. It's having the best-in-class plant. We're also going to set up super centers in Alberta, in Manitoba, and in Saskatchewan. So there'll be a network.
If you are interested in learning more, go to genesisfertilizers.com. We're talking markets here with Brian Comeault of Ireland, Comeault, Lafoy. We're going to talk wheat here in a second. But first, join the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association at their AGM June 8th to the 10th in Moose Jaw. Brian, do you like Moose Jaw?
I love Moose Jaw.
Yeah, there's lots to do there.
I've been to the spa there a few times. I don't know if I should admit that, but it is a good place to be.
Absolutely. You're like, Moose Jaw Spa? Oh, yeah. Some pretty good museums as well. It's happening in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Registration is now open. Visit skstockgrowers.com for more information and to register. As I mentioned, we are talking to Brian Comeault of Ireland, Comeault, Lafoy. Wheat. I guess let's start in the U.S. We had an update yesterday on the wheat crop conditions in the U.S. What did that report tell us from USDA?
We actually saw some reductions in the winter wheat conditions ratings. I think this caught the market a little bit by surprise. I think they were looking for an unchanged crop condition ratings at about 52% good to excellent. It was reduced to 50% good to excellent. So that caught the market a little off guard. That has wheat up today substantially. This was the first week as well for U.S. spring wheat reporting, and that came in at 45% good to excellent, which was significantly below where the market was expecting. The one report I had read was that the expectation was 70% good to excellent, which would kind of be in between average and last year's initial crop rating. So it's not 70 sounds large, but it would have been in between that. They reported at 45. There's been a significant amount of rain in the Dakotas and in the spring wheat areas. So I think maybe the crop ratings folks are looking at maybe some drowning or some issues related to excessive moisture, as opposed to a lot of the chatter in some areas has been in dryness, right? So given that, I suppose there's an opportunity for spring wheat, because it's well supplied with water, that it could rebound pretty significantly. But hey, it has wheat markets up, today as a result, after some, multiple weeks of pressure.
And I think the trouble too, Brian, is on some of the recent rains. I know from Western Canadian prairie perspective, it's hard to get it's great. There has been some rain that has gone through some parts. It's been a little bit cooler as well, though, which buys you some time. But the fact is, there's not a lot of moisture reserve there. So sure, it's rained the last couple weeks in certain areas, but we're going to need more within a couple weeks. It's going to hold us through to grain fill. So we're still in this need rain at the right time sort of mode this year.
Exactly. And I mean, there is a dichotomy between, the big rains hit, southern North Dakota and into South Dakota. So we didn't see that in Canada, and we're quite deficient. So, but their acres is lower. Like I think it was just over 10 million acres, which is really low for spring wheat. So any kind of hiccups in the growing season is going to be felt in the US for sure.
Yeah. Acreage number, and you think that you'd said in the prior segment that this is a year where you kind of go back to the basics, the main crops, and wheat, of course, is one of those crops. Do you think where do you have the wheat number on acres?
For Canada?
Yeah.
I think at this point I'm in line with Statistics Canada. I don't have that number right in front of me here, but I think they were showing an increase year over year. I think that could be still realistic. The cash prices for wheat are still relatively strong, even though the futures, have backed off. Yeah. So there's still, some profitable areas to be had for wheat, and canola is an expensive crop to grow. So it does make sense to me. I think those two major crops at this point, my bias is still for not a whole lot of change in those two crops.
Yeah. And because of, the cost cutting mode that farmers have been in through the winter, right? It's that decision on canola versus wheat. You look at the upfront cost or the in-season cost. You're like, oh yeah, wheat, I can probably get away with, maybe I'm going to go that direction. So you can see how some of those acres may steer that way. Whether or not they come out of canola or they come out of peas and flax, we'll have to wait and see on that. To finish up here from a wheat perspective, demand. What's demand look like?
Demand, globally, demand. What it feels like is that the world is shifted to kind of a hand-to-mouth kind of operation where, they know where the wheat stocks are. The U.S. just reported 900 million tons of demand, of ending stocks for the next year. So the market doesn't feel like they're really craving demand or stockpiling. Having said that, Canadian demand are, wheat exports have been really strong in Canada. And, for no necessarily obvious reason, which I think just means that there is a confidence in doing business with Canada that, may not be available in other areas like the Black Sea, for example, things like that. So I think we're taking advantage of that. And so I think our Canadian wheat demand is strong and will likely continue to remain that way. Particularly if we have, a half decent year for wheat production.
Yeah, great stuff. Hey, Brian, thanks a lot for joining us here today on on RealAg Radio. Really appreciate it.
You betcha. Have a great rest of your week.
Awesome stuff. That is Brian Comeault, Ireland, Comeault, Lafoy. Check him out. Do some great work. Really appreciate Brian joining us here today on the program. Hey, this segment was brought to you by Ag Expert. Deep in the fields and deep in the data to back up your decisions on the farm. Get started at agexpert.ca. We're back when we come back. Of course, we'll be back when we come back. We're going to be joined by John Barlow, Shadow Minister of Agriculture for the Conservative Party of Canada, right after this. Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Hey, pest beware. Look out. Your fields have heroes. The Pest Predator podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and is powered by Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. They work for you for free, those beneficial insects. Learn more by going to fieldheroes.ca and make sure you check out that Pest and Predator podcast. Well, the joys of hosting a radio show on a daily basis, things come up. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to have John Barlow today on the show. Caucus meeting has run overtime, so that he's got to take care of that business. So no John Barlow, but what I thought we would do is and take some of the things I was going to talk to John about and really look at it from this perspective of where does the government need to be focusing from the opposition point of view. So what we'll do instead is we'll look at it from the farmer's point of view. So in the April edition of the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, we asked Canadian farmers about some of the policies and how they impact their businesses. Okay. And quite a long list, and appreciate all the people that filled out the Real Agri Studies Insights panel email that went out. If you want more information on Real Agri Studies and being a member of that Insights panel, you can do that by going to realagristudies.com. Okay, so the first question that we asked was, for each of the following areas of policy, please identify the degree of impact they have on your farming operation. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm going to pull that up. Okay, so what we asked about was, we listed a bunch of things here, okay? So we have public plant breeding, biofuels, agri-stability, crop insurance subsidies, foreign worker access, labor negotiations for railways and terminals, pesticide regulation, trade and market access negotiation, environmental programs, municipal government policy, value-added processing, and access to credit and financing. Whew, exhaustive list. Probably there's more we didn't even have on here. So what you said, the farming audience, from a Canadian farmer perspective, is you had to decide, was it a very positive impact, slightly positive, neutral, slightly negative, or very negative? So the scale is basically -2 to +2. And what people said was the most positive impact of policy on farmers is the focus on value-added processing and committing to trying to increase value-added processing, 0.81. Okay. The second was, this is interesting identification here, crop insurance subsidies, seeing, that policy of making sure that we have adequate crop insurance subsidies, helping you out with that premium. It's a 0.8. It's a 0.8. Public plant breeding was 0.75. And then it's a pretty steep, we got access to credit and financing is 0.67. Then it's it falls back pretty hard. The most negative was pesticide regulation, and the second most negative was environmental programs such as off-calf was at negative 0.17. So then what we did is we asked farmers about, okay, so where does there need to be more attention? Okay, so we've got where the impact is, and positive versus negative. Now it's like, okay, so we asked, now based on where things stand today, please indicate the level of attention you feel the new government needs to be paying to each of these areas. And we have a lot less attention is 2, and a lot more attention is -2. So we want a deeper number to the negative. Trade and market access. Negative 0.164. That is a pretty sharp reminder there that this is the flip that Canadian farmers want to see. They want to see the Canadian government focusing more on trade in this government than the prior government. This is very similar to the U.S. when the flip from Biden to Trump. One of the biggest, I guess, critiques farmers had of the Biden administration, among a few things, but the biggest one was the lack of focus on trade. And I think, in this situation in Canada, the switch from Trudeau to Carney, it's not a political, it's not going liberal to conservative, but it's probably a little bit more blue version of liberal under Carney. At least that's the way they're talking if you pay attention to the throne speech from yesterday. So farmers want to see more attention paid on trade. Second, labor negotiations for railways and terminals. Negative 1.31 out of 2. So again, had a lot of labor disruption. That's tied to trade. If we can't get products from the middle of Saskatchewan out to port, it's pretty hard to have, take advantage of some of that trade and market access that the Canadian government has negotiated. And the third one is value-added processing. And I'm going to be writing about all this on RealAgriculture.com. This is just to give you a bit of a sniff of all of it. Actually, the one where farmers wanted to see less attention paid, not going to surprise you, environmental programs. It was basically neutral. Okay. Otherwise, they were all 0.52 or lower. So if we create some sort of like a gap analysis, so basically taking the positive or negative impact and reconciling that where farmers think the attention needs to be paid for this new government, it kind of gives us an idea where the gaps are to really solidify here where this new government and Minister Heath MacDonald Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food, where the focus should be. Here's the winners. Farmers want to see a real key focus on value-added processing. They want to see it on trade and market access negotiation. They want to see attention on crop insurance subsidies, and they want to see attention on public plant breeding. The public plant breeding one is really an interesting one from the standpoint of there's been a lot of misconceptions or misunderstandings in terms of what the government's future is when it comes to public plant breeding. Is the federal government and AFC committed to public plant breeding? Is this something that just sort of like a slow wander into the sunset and eventually it'll all be gone? What is the platform, especially at a time where we're going to probably see some cost cutting when it comes to some of these government departments? So that's an interesting. Farmers saying public plant breeding important to them and they want some attention paid to it. And we also had access to credit and financing as well at a 1.53. So that's kind of an overview of the policies. And if you look at value-added processing as an area where farmers want to see the government pay some attention, is, how do we do that? So, okay, if we identify that as a policy issue that's important to farmers, has a positive impact, and they want to see more attention paid to it by government, what does that actually look like? Is it through like the Protein Industries Canada sort of model, the science superclusters? We're trying to, provide government funding to give industries a kind of a leg up, a head start, sort of what Canada's trying to do in the EV production, which has come up with a lot of mixed results and probably a lot of money potentially very much wasted, and millions of dollars wasted. If that industry doesn't really come to fruition like some had thought maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Or is it about tax breaks, incentives, tax credits, ways to lure that value-added processing into the country to give farmers more access to that higher level of processing? You look at the increase in the domestic canola crush in Western Canada and some of those intentions. Now, some of those projects have gone away, but there is still there's still an indication that domestic crush is going up. The capacity is going to be higher. And where that plant is it on the south side of the border or is it on the north side of the 49th parallel, is something that, the Canadian government is trying they want it to be on the north side of the border where the production is on something like canola. During the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about slaughterhouse capacity. That's value-added processing. So kind of fascinating here. I tend to agree with the areas where farmers have really identified. What we're doing over the next coming weeks is looking at each of these individually and really digging in on some of the demographics of it. What did young farmers say versus older farmers? Where, farm size, how is that an influence? So stay tuned to East-West as well. So stay tuned for that. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. When we come back, we got a farm safety roundup. We're talking about safety around large animals. Right back right after this.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
And welcome back to Real Ag Radio. Farmers' trust is everything. Genesis Fertilizers is making real progress toward providing reliable, locally produced fertilizer. Join the ownership group and protect your bottom line. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility. You know, regardless of the types of animals you raise on your farm or your comfort level, animal behavior, well, it's pretty unpredictable. Even more so during breeding, transporting, and vaccinating, when the risk of injury is so much higher. You know, kicks, bites, crushing injuries are among the most common, and they actually can be fatal as well, which we're really trying to avoid. Today on the Farm Safety Roundup, understanding animal behavior, the importance of planning, and key tips to help keep you and your workers safe. Chad Roberts is a cattle and horse farmer and a senior health and safety account manager with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, joining us from his farm outside of Hamilton, Ontario. Hey, Chad, how are you doing?
Good, Shaun. How are you?
I'm doing really well. And, you know, I think one of the key words here, Chad, when we're talking about animals is unpredictability, but there are things we can do to be more safe around large animals. Well, what's the first step with large animals? And no matter the task, what you're doing, what are some of the things we can do from a safety and pre-planning as we get the job done?
Yeah, Shaun, that's a good point. I mean, planning is key when we're working with large animal. And, you know, when we talk about large animal, we often associate cattle and horses, but, you know, there are other types of large animals, right? We have different swine and we have goats and we have sheep. You know, we're seeing a number of herds of alpacas now, and then we get into emus and ostriches. So when we talk about large animal, we have to consider everything. But pre-planning for all these species is important, right? And I guess it really starts with understanding, what animal you're dealing with. You know, we will handle a horse differently than we will handle a cow. We will handle a cow differently than we will handle a pig, and so on. So, you know, that initial, you know, kind of assessment about, you know, what animal are we dealing with is, I think, the first piece. And then we get into, you know, what is the type of animal? So now we've established that, you know, in this case, let's just say we're handling cattle. You know, what type of cattle is it? You know, what breed is it? Because they all have intricacies. They all have characteristics. They all have different temperaments, the same as humans, right? So that assessment of, you know, where we're starting, what are we dealing with? What environment are we in with them? That, I think that's important.
Once you have that plan in place, you need to ensure you have what you need to execute it. And as farmers, we know even the best plans can go awry. So you have to maybe shift on the fly and put in plan B and C as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, again, when we're doing that planning piece, we're also assessing what are we doing with the animal, right? Because there's a number of different tasks that as, you know, animal producers or animal handlers that we have to do with animals. You know, it can be something as simple as, you know, recreational riding a horse, or are we loading it for transport? With cattle, you know, are we, you know, vaccinating them, catching them to vaccinate them? Are we moving them from one pasture to the other? Are we splitting the herd? Are we assisting in some type of a calving situation? So understanding what we're doing with them is also important. And then that kind of leads us into how we're going to handle them. So, you know, for example, you know, if we're, you know, staying on the path of cattle, I mean, if we're going to be vaccinating and, you know, performing any type of animal care, it's always recommended that we use some sort of chute system or some type of, you know, gate system, getting them into a smaller area if possible. I mean, that's kind of where we start to develop the plan and ensuring that, you know, we put ourselves at the least risk, right? And then we start to, you know, also look at, you know, and I'm going to circle back to the type of cattle. You know, are we dealing with cattle that are young livestock? Are we dealing with cattle that are older livestock that maybe know the routine? You know, are we in a small group? Are we in a large herd? Because all that contributes to their stress level, to what, you know, we often hear of, you know, the fight or flight response, all those type of things. So understanding all of that, and then we start to develop that plan is important. Now, we also have to be very realistic. Not every time we deal with these animals, they're going to be in a fully functioning barn with all the tools available to us. So we sometimes have to improvise as well. For instance, on my farm, I have some pastures in some different areas that I don't have, necessarily gate system and chute systems and all those type of things. So we have to look to other mechanisms. Maybe we lasso animals to, put them in a state that they're not going to injure us till we can treat them appropriately and provide that proper animal care. So I guess, Shaun, really it's really, that is the key piece for me to really, express to folks about understanding where you are, what animal you're dealing with, what controls can we put into place to ensure that, that we're not going to get injured. A common misconception with, maybe newer people that are handling livestock, or, we're going to call them workers or summer students or people that maybe haven't been raised or worked on a farm, is, that we can overpower them or overstrengthen them or restrain them. And that's just not possible for the most part with large animal, right? So we have to use these tools and other controls to make sure that we keep them safe and as well as safe.
Yeah, from a cattle standpoint, I think of in the feed yard I grew up in, right? You move from where you've got right angles on cattle pathways or alleys, right, to more of a curved approach, or you get those, a working tub approach instead of cattle having to fight, running up against a fence. So those are obviously improve the flow of cattle and the handling of them, but also there's safety measures too. Less chance they're going to turn around and come back at you. And one of the things that also is think about the escape routes. Okay, if something happens here and they're coming back the other way, how am I getting out of the way so I am not being trampled and hurt? Now, from a large animal perspective, are there situations where the animal may need to be restrained, and what are some of the best practices there?
Yeah, there is times, again, back to animal care or possible birthing issues where you're going to have to restrain them to a point where you can help them, right? And essentially they don't understand that. Large animals, as much as they enjoy humans and we interact with them very well, large animals don't necessarily understand what you may be trying to help them. So they have that, we often, again, hear about a fight or flight response. So in their time of stress, they may look at you as a threat. They look at young children as threats. They look at you as a threat when they're in that state. They look at, pets as a threat. So those type of things are important to keep in mind when we're handling them. But yes, absolutely. It's very hard. They're not like humans, right? We know if we have something wrong with us, then we, typically will seek medical attention. We will ask for help. We will, go to the doctor. They don't have that. They rely on us to provide that care to them. So, but they don't necessarily understand why we're trying to capture them or why we're trying to restrain them or hold them or, give them a needle or help them with their birthing, because, they may not understand that the calf or the foal is coming out backwards, or, that there's an issue with a leg caught or different birthing problems that they can run into. They just know that something's wrong and they're at a high level of stress. So restraining them is important for their safety. It's important for us to make sure that we can actually help them the way we need to help them. And obviously to ensure we do it without being, injured ourselves.
You mentioned earlier that it's the species we're talking about that's really important here. So, people could say, well, I grew up around animals. We had horses. Well, that's, you can do things around a horse or a lamb that you can't do around, a full-size steer or for sure not a buffalo, right? And so training here is important. What role does training play, and how do we make sure that we implement a program that's going to keep people safe?
Yeah, and that's a tough one, Shaun, to be honest with you. Ideally I could sit here and say that there's different courses out there and there's different things you can do, but we do have some very valuable resources on our website at WSPS. We have tips and we have different types of best practices, but a lot of it really comes down to experience and, learning from others that have handled animals, being around people, because they react differently. Like, again, just like humans, every animal has a temper. Every animal has, a comfort zone. So picking up on those keys and learning from others on what to look for and what to proactively anticipate really goes a long way. So, there is a lot of, again, videos out there and different tips and best practices, but, I guess over assuming is always a problem. Like you said, I grew up on a farm, so I should be able to handle this. Another mistake that we often see in the industry is too, I mean, as farmers, we help each other out quite a bit, right? I often get called to help other farmers, whether we're doing different things with large animals. So you're going onto a different farm, and as experienced as I am, I don't necessarily know their animals, and they don't know me, and I'm a stranger, I'm a threat, so assessing all that type of stuff is different. So we can be as well trained as we want, but we have to be very situationally aware when we're dealing with large animals. Our own, sometimes we get complacent. I mean, for myself, sometimes I'll get complacent because I work with them all the time, and at the end of the day, we fail to remember, or some of us do, that they are animals. They are large, they are strong, and at the end of the day, they will do animal instincts if they feel threatened.
Yeah. Site specific. Great point. I think about escape routes, right? Where it's like, wait a minute, as I think there's an escape door, and there's not, because I'm thinking about my facility that I grew up in, not the one I'm actually working in, right? Just little things like that seem, maybe you don't notice at first if you don't kind of do some of the walkthroughs and some of the thinking ahead and being proactive. That one comes to mind. Okay, Chad, summarize this for us. What do we need to do to create a safer environment around large animals?
Yeah, I think generally, and again, I don't want to continue to reiterate, but that planning piece, understanding what we're dealing with is so important. Understanding the type of animal, the species, the temperament, and then understanding what we're going to do with them and how they may react or may not react. That's the first piece. Then when we've understood that, we understand, what may be a risk to us or what may go well, then we obviously put in the plan. And when we put in the plan, we can't be afraid to stop and say, what, that didn't work. I didn't corral them the way I wanted. This one doesn't seem to be, reacting the way I anticipated. Sometimes we have to stop and reconfigure because, as farmers and, in the agricultural business, we're so busy, right? We're trying to do this and we need to vaccinate this group of animals and then head to the field. And there's so many things going on, but it's really important that we, give ourselves the opportunity to stop and recalibrate if needed. But that pre-planning, having the tools available, again, Shaun, I think is important. The more, mechanical advantages we can use between, again, like you said, chutes to keep them from turning back and different head gates and those type of things to, again, protect themselves and ourselves is important. Looking at resources, sometimes we do need an extra set of hands or two, but then sometimes more people can be not as helpful, right? I know, certain large animals are very, feel very uncomfortable with new people or a number of people around. So I think there's not one real thing, but, understanding all those pieces and be willing to take that approach, I think will essentially help us, keep ourselves safe, keep our family safe, keep our workers safe, students, anybody that may be visitors as well, right? So anybody on the farm.
Great stuff. Hey, Chad, thanks for joining us here today on the Farm Safety Roundup.
Thank you very much, Shaun. You have a great day.
Awesome stuff. Hey, listeners, you can get more information that is free, and there's a lot of easy-to-use resources by going to wsps.ca/farm safety. Great information there from WSPS. Appreciate Chad joining us for the Farm Safety Roundup. If you have any feedback on today's show, Brian Comeault talking about the markets, want to hear from you, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers everybody.